just decisions, critical, creative, and caring decisions. And I think that philosophy for children is probably the only educational approach which is concerned to improve judgment. It seeks to improve judgment not only by trying to understand what makes a judgment suitable for a given situation. We have to make our children more judicious, more aware, more articulate, more understanding. We should not confuse understanding with knowledge. Many people have a lot of knowledge, but little understanding. Many people have understanding, but they can't translate it into applications to specific situations. And that requires judgment. So we have to go beyond just educating for knowledge, educating for facts, and think in terms of the discussion skills which will help children be more successful in their attempts to live in a century as complex as the one that we seem to be moving into. The child must be brought into the educational process. The child must begin to appreciate the educational experience as an experience, just as play is an experience, just as work is an experience, just as family and love are experiences. So education is an experience to be cherished and desired, because it's something precious and it's something very stimulating when it is done right. That means that there has to be new relationships developed between teachers and children, more cooperative relationships, more working relationships, more caring relationships than we have seen in the past. We have to make children flexible in their knowledge, flexible in their skills, flexible in their judgment, so that they can deal with the many different pressures and problems that they will be called upon to face in their lives in the century ahead. This cannot be done simply by warming over the curriculum of last year, or over 100 years ago.
It seems to me that we also have the responsibility to prepare teachers in such a way that they can foster among children a global consciousness. And what I mean by that is a sense of how they, as individuals, relate to the whole, all of the people on the planet. This global consciousness also involves an ethical awareness of our relationship, not just to other people, but also to nature itself. How we should care for nature, and how our caring will be instrumental in the survival of the planet. When I talk about the reform of teacher education, what I'm implying is that from the very first year that the student enters into the university, he or she should be immersed in communities of inquiry where they learn how to think together, to work together, and to construct knowledge together. We can't expect teachers to be able to foster something that they themselves have never experienced. There's a sense in which their entire education should be immersion into and fostering of the perfection of participation in classroom communities of inquiry. Right. Now you can say, well, what does that mean in the concrete? Well, if you were to go into a traditional school of education today, my hunch is that you would see many professors lecturing to students about how to teach. If you were to go into a school of education that had decided to change its paradigm, you would see people, both teachers and students, immersed in intellectual inquiry about matters that they felt were important to the educational process. In 1992, some teachers asked me if I could write a letter to them giving them some advice on how to teach philosophy to elementary school children. They were not total novices. They had been through a training program in philosophy for children. Yet as they began to teach in their own classrooms, they were afraid. They were afraid that A, maybe they wouldn't be, quote, really doing philosophy. Secondly, they were afraid that perhaps they would, without being fully conscious of it, be indoctrinating children. And thirdly, they were really not quite sure of how to proceed. Now you have to remember that these teachers were teachers who have been brought up in traditional schools of education where the teacher was kind of a fount of knowledge, somebody who supposedly knew all the answers. She knew from her training program that philosophical issues are not the kinds of things that we have definite answers to. We had tried to explain to teachers that a philosophical concept is what we call the 3 C's. It has to be common to all children's experience. It has to be central or important to their experience. But most importantly, it has to be controversial. It has to be the kind of concept that children need to share views about before they can come to gain a clear understanding of what that concept means for them. Such philosophical concepts are friendship or mind or what it is to be a person or what do we mean when we say the word love or what do we mean when we say the word good. To be a good teacher of philosophy, one has to know how to listen. It's not so much recounting what you know, but rather listening to the opinions of the children and trying to remember for yourself how these opinions, in many instances, reconstruct the history of philosophy as you have mastered it for yourself. Secondly, it seems to me that you have to be a person who is willing to inquire with children. They have to see you as somebody who they have to see you as somebody who doesn't think that she knows all the answers and that this process of inquiry that we're about to commence can make as much difference for her as it can for you in coming to some deeper understanding of, let's say, a concept like mind or children's rights or what we mean by justice. The the students also need to see you as a person who loves ideas, who has allowed herself to immerse herself in the philosophical conversation that's taken place for 2,500 years, and now wants to invite you into that philosophical conversation. Teachers have to learn how to take what children say very seriously, and yet at the same time to demand a kind of logical rigor in the process of communal inquiry, so that the children, whether they realize it or not, are coming to master certain ways of proceeding. For example, learning how to give reasons, learning how to give counterexamples, learning how to make good inferences, learning how to question, learning how to present alternative views in a non-threatening manner. These are all important moves that one learns the longer one participates in a community of inquiry. Teachers, in time, come to realize the teaching of philosophy is like opening up a world, not just for the children, but for themselves. It's an elementary school discipline that seems to be as full of wonder and full of meaning for an adult as it is for any child. And that makes it very different from other disciplines that elementary school teachers teach in the classroom. After 22 years now of teaching, I can still say that I find the teaching of philosophy in an elementary classroom vital, meaningful, and lots of fun. That lots of fun is very important. I can't imagine a teacher not having fun in a community of inquiry at least a couple of times a day. Why? Because teachers should find themselves enjoying the inquiry as much as the students. And they should, in a relatively short time, begin to see a difference in how they themselves go about their everyday lives and their everyday worlds. They should begin to realize that there's a sense in which they haven't stopped growing, that they can continue to grow, and they can continue to look at these concepts that seem to form the basis of our daily experience, like self, language, meaning, freedom, and reconstruct what they mean for us in our daily experience as we listen to the children of the world and what they think. Very often teachers find it difficult to come to accept that the role of the teacher in a community of inquiry changes with time. In the beginning, it's very important that he or she be able to model all the moves of good inquiry. So if you were to visit a classroom, in the beginning of the year, you might find the teacher talking a great deal. Notice, however, that she's not talking substantively. Her remarks tend to be procedural in nature. She's asking for clarification, or she's offering a counterexample, or she's asking other people what they think, or she's asking for reasons, or she's asking for alternative points of view. However, it would seem to me that within a couple of months, her need to do that kind of procedural prompting should disappear, and the children should internalize the moves for themselves so that they're asking each other for reasons, they're asking each other for assumptions, they're identifying assumptions of each other's remarks and bringing them to the table for further inquiry. If you want to prepare children to take part in a strong democracy, it would seem to me that this kind of internalization of excellent thinking has got to take place at the very young, formative ages of our educational process. One way is to ask yourself, what are you trying to do? If one of the central traits of a community of inquiry is learning how to self-correct, that implies that we become conscious of criteria or norms by which we can self-correct. Criteria of a good functioning community of inquiry should be discussed and made available to the students as well as to the teachers, so that the locus of evaluation moves from administrators to teachers to the children themselves. What I'm saying is that ultimately children should be able to evaluate their own sessions by telling you how they have progressed from the last evaluation and making clear the criteria that they're using in making the judgments of evaluation about themselves. For example, students are very capable of evaluating two sets of tapes, one that was taken at the beginning of the school year and let's say one that's taken in the middle of the school year. And they might say, look how in the middle of the school year we're asking each other for reasons. Look how many of us are questioning the assumptions of others. Look how many of us are offering alternative points of view. Look how some of us are making creative leaps in the dialogue that we never made in the beginning. Look how there seems to be an atmosphere of trust in the classroom, where some of us are even trying out ideas that we're not even sure of ourselves, and yet we all understand that because we just want to see where the idea would go and what the consequences of that idea would be. This kind of evaluation, it seems to me, is congruent with the central aims of the community of inquiry. Well, in a society where education is valued, one would hope that educators would be able to put pressure on the government to put more and more of their money into the education of future generations than into other expenses like military expenses. However, we might find ourselves in situations time and time again where nothing can be done about having 50 children in a classroom. Does that mean that a community of inquiry is impossible? And the answer is no. It certainly is far more difficult. We're going to have to play different roles as we proceed. But it has been my experience that it is not impossible. If the children really believe that you are willing to inquire about philosophical concepts and are willing to take what they have to say very seriously, even in a class of 50 or 60 students, one can find authentic communal inquiry going on. Teachers are also concerned that very often the materials that have been developed by the Institute for the Advancement of Philosophy for Children are not appropriate for the situations in which they find themselves. They're either too long, or perhaps they do not relate to the life experiences of the children with whom they're working. And very often teachers ask me, well, can we use other things? And the answer is yes, of course you can use other things. There are short movies, there are short videos, there are stories of all sorts of kinds that would be appropriate. The materials that have been created by the IEPC have in a sense, put the philosophical concepts and the philosophical procedures right on the surface of the stories, so that you almost have to be blind not to see what's going on. That's not the case in children's literature. Very often, it's full of philosophical concepts and has the potential to initiate wonderful philosophical dialogue. But the onus of responsibility in that case is going to fall very much on the teacher. She's going to have to be able to identify those concepts for herself and be able to construct discussion plans and exercises that would initiate the kind of dialogue that would be appropriate for the age of the children. Constructing those kinds of discussion plans and exercises is not something that can be learned in a year or two. It takes many years to A, understand the philosophical conversation that has taken place in the West, B, to be able to compare that conversation with views of the East and views of non-traditional societies like in Africa, and thirdly, to be able to appropriate it in such a way that you can relate it to children's experience and to the things that they find puzzling and wondering in their own lives. We have a saying at the Institute that one has to be pedagogically strong but philosophically self-correcting. That is, that the children have to realize that the teacher is somebody who knows what she's doing, and that if they will only give her the benefit of the doubt in the beginning, they might find themselves in inquiry that can be very meaningful and open up a whole other dimension of their life. But in order for this to happen, the children have to be able to trust her. They have to feel that she can respect them as persons and as potential thinkers and even potential philosophers. If that's in place, it seems to me that 50% of the work is already done. And the rest has to be done by the group themselves. They have to evolve for themselves rules and procedures of dialogue that make sense for them. Certainly, if we all talk at one time, nobody can hear anybody else. On the other hand, who should talk when and how we should proceed in letting this one rather than that one talk is something that the group just has to work out for itself as communal inquiry proceeds. If you can speak at the age of 3, then you're more than capable of doing philosophy if you find yourself among adults and children who are willing to engage in the inquiry with you. Think of a child of 3. Think of the things that are important in her daily life and of the words that she uses as she goes through her day. Her mother expects her to get up on time. She expects her to be a good girl. Her brothers and sisters go to school. When she asks why they go to school, she's told that they go there to get an education. All of these concepts, time, good, education, are concepts that need exploration in order for a 3-year-old to make some kind of sense of her world.
Philosophy for children does not represent knowledge. It represents inquisitiveness, curiosity, creativity, imagination. It represents a mass of questions on all different sorts of subjects that children can become more and more intrigued by, and teachers too.